I can't hear you. No. Good morning. Good morning. All right. Sounds like everybody got wonderful sleep last night. Not. I'm going to get into our last lesson here on redemption. And I want this to realize we're talking about in the Bible class how our actions affect the broader world around us. For example, if you don't get enough sleep, right, it can affect your family around you or your friends and maybe cause you to do things that you didn't want to do, right? But here in the scriptures, we can see that God has designed humanity for life. He wants us to have an effect on everybody else who does not participate in that life, though. Some people actively reject the life that God has given them. We were designed for life, right? But we were instead captured or ensnared by death. And so the entire storyline of the Bible is telling us, it's teaching us how God can transfer us back into life in Him, right? And the question is, how do we get there? How does He redeem us? And we talked about how redemption is sometimes talked about in monetary terms, how it's an exchange sometimes. Every 50 years, you have the Jubilee year, and there's a lot of redemption language used around that time period. And last week, we finally ended up with Romans chapter 8 in verse 23. Let me just read it. It says, "Not only that, but we ourselves have the Spirit as the first fruits. We groan within ourselves, eagerly awaiting for the adoption, the redemption of our bodies." We are eagerly awaiting our own physical redemption. Here, this resurrection that we are waiting for is our redemption. Now, Paul makes another statement here. So, let me back up. Here, when we talk about redemption, that redemption refers to sort of that final step of salvation, the resurrection, where our physical bodies are being liberated from death and decay. But if you'll notice in the text here, they are not being liberated from the earth, right? And so now let's look at what Paul expects to happen when that resurrection takes place. When God's redemptive purposes, if we want to put it in the fancy language, when His redemptive purposes are finally fully realized, right? In Romans chapter 8 here, he's going to draw a picture for us, Paul is. And it's a picture of childbirth and how there's lots of labor pains during childbirth. There's lots of labor pains. And he uses the language also of Exodus 23. And Exodus 23 is where the Israelites were groaning in their bondage. Did I say Exodus 23? Exodus chapter 2. Where the Israelites are groaning in their bondage under Pharaoh, right? That's a different sort of pain. We have labor pains. We have groaning under Pharaoh-type pains. And now in Romans chapter 8 here, verse 19 through 23, Paul is going to apply those images not just to the human condition, but to the entire created cosmos, to the entire world. And so there's a shift happening here. The perspective shifts the focus from just individual escape from death and from suffering in this world It's now going to focus on the liberation and the restoration of the entire physical universe. So let's break down what's happening here in this, what the scheme or the outline here of what's happening in this, what I'm calling a cosmic exodus in Romans chapter 8. Let me first start by giving an anecdote, though, right? This is supposed to be me, in a three-piece suit as I hike on my way to work. That's what I told the AI to give me a picture of. So that's not what I said, but anyway. I posted, after I wrote up what I wanted to say, I posted that in the image generator, and this is the image it gave me, which is semi-close, I guess, except I don't wear shoes and dress shoes to work at Sportsman's Warehouse. So there are a lot of hiking trails where I used to live in Solana, right? And sometimes on my lunch break, I would walk down by the river that was across the street or around the corner. And most of those trails I knew pretty well, right? There was one that went right down by the Kenai River, right along the river, and another that went through the woods, through the spruce. It's mostly the trees that are there, the spruce forest, where you could see animals, right? We had rabbits and squirrels and bears sometimes, because it's down by the river. Not very often did you see a moose in the woods, but sometimes. But there was another path that I knew about, but that I hadn't ever taken because it was always overgrown, and I didn't know really where it went. And so I just went on the main trails, right? And most of these walks, I'm in a hurry because I'm just on lunch break, right? So I didn't pay attention to the sign that was in front of this trail. All I could see was the letter V. I thought it was like a label for the trail or something. I don't know. Anyway, but one day, when I came to the head of that trail, somebody had cut the brush down. And somebody had cleared that brush enough to reveal the rest of the sign that I couldn't read, right? And the first letter was V, second letter was I, view. That's exactly what I wanted on my lunch break, was a little view. And so I went down that trail, and it was a little muddy, and I wish I had boots on instead of shoes, but the trail cut through the trees, and it began to go uphill and climb and climb and climb. After a little while, I realized what was going to happen. It was a view trail. I was going to be able to see something. And instead of thick trees around me, it comes up to a little area that you could step up on, and like a rock. And it was out of those trees that I could see the whole of the, I don't know what the word you want to use, the whole of the countryside that was around me. I was not only looking down at the forest around me, but I could also see beyond it. I could see a little town. I could see houses, right? It was like a little picture from a postcard with smoke coming out of the cabins and things. I might never have known had I not gone down that trail. I might never have seen that view if I had never gone down that trail. I want you to keep that in your mind as we look at Romans chapter 8 now, verses 18 through 25. Because Romans 8, 18 through 25 is like that view. It's like hiking up to that high place and seeing afar. And from that high place, we can see with this amazing clarity the whole plan of salvation, not just for humans, but for all of God's creation. And once you've seen that view, once you've just taken a little peek at it, you can never forget it. And the problem is, unfortunately, for most readers of Romans, this is a trail that we don't normally go down, right? It's covered up. We don't see it, or we're in a hurry. We're so busy reading something else or on our reading plan or something that's going on. Or maybe we're interested in finding my doctrine that I want to find in here of justification or salvation or whatever it is. I'm looking for something else. We've been eager for these moral lessons, for an experience to understand the spirit of what he's trying to tell us there, right? What is the Spirit trying to tell us here? Paul says we have the Spirit. What does that mean? That sometimes we miss the signpost. The signpost here in Romans 8 that might have told us to turn this way and to look and walk up that pathway has been covered up by our own desires. The language of creation that is being personified as a living, breathing thing is not what we expect in the middle of looking for our own redemption. And so we have this strange idea of God subjecting creation to futility, subjecting creation to slavery, and of creation then being rescued, being redeemed. And that's sometimes just not what we're trying to hear when we read the Bible. And so it becomes difficult for us to interpret these things. Well, why would you write that, Paul, in the middle of this section? Right? The pathway has been covered up by the brush, right? And these strange, what some people might call apocalyptic ideas can be unsettling, and so we hurry on to a different section. But this morning, I want to tell you that from the top of this hill here in Romans chapter 8, you can see forever. We can see past the end of our lives, past the death of our bodies, past the death of this earth, into forever. Now, imagine you're Paul writing this letter to the Romans, and you've had this great flow of narrative and rhetorical language and structure, and you're making these great arguments. Would you ramble on about a few irrelevant things in there? Well, no. And so the question is, how do they relate to what's going on here in the climax of his argument for redemption here in chapter 8? Which is really the climax of the letter so far. The letter of Romans comes to this great peak here in chapter 8. This is vital to our thinking. Paul's not going to go off on a tangent in the middle of his climax here. So let me just read again verses 18 through 25. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is going to be revealed to us. For the creation eagerly waits. This is like getting to the top of the hill. The revealing of what is going to be. Paul is going to reveal some of that to us now. For the creation eagerly waits with anticipation for God's sons to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from the bondage to decay into the glorious freedom of God's children. You see, somehow our redemption has an effect on the earth. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together with labor pains until now. Not only that, but we ourselves, who have the Spirit as the first fruits, we also groan within ourselves. So the creation is groaning and we are groaning. Why? Because we are eagerly awaiting for adoption. Shh. Elizabeth, please. Please stop. Don't keep doing it when I ask you to stop. No more folding, okay? It's too loud. Thank you. It's distracting me. Not only that, but we who have the Spirit as the first fruits, we also groan within ourselves, eagerly awaiting for the adoption, the redemption of our bodies. Now, in this hope, we are saved. But hope that is seen is not hope, because who hopes for what he sees? Now, if we hope for what we do not see, we eagerly wait for it with patience. So we, who's the we? Paul, but also the creation, is waiting with patience for something that is better. So Paul is beginning this paragraph where the previous one left off, talking about the Holy Spirit ministering there. And if we are heirs, and if we're God's children, then we are heirs and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him, that we might be glorified with him. And because we suffered and are glorified with him, we get redemption. That's the whole point here of the previous paragraph that it's leading to. The promise that this present suffering, even though it might be intense sometimes, it's going to be far outweighed by the glory that is going to be unveiled to us or for us. Notice that it's unveiled for us. Notice that it's not unveiled in us. This glory is unveiled for us. I want you to keep that in mind. It's not as though glorification were something that is going to please us. It's not something that's inside of us, this glorification. What does verse 19 say? For the creation eagerly waits with anticipation for the sons of God to be revealed. Not to us, as if we're going to be spectators watching this glory, right? Like people watching a fireworks show, right? The point of this glory is that it means glorious sovereign rule, sharing the Messiah's kingdom and his kingdom rule over the whole of the world. And that is what the whole of creation is waiting for. It's waiting for us. It's waiting for you and me and for all of God's children to be revealed in our glorious resurrection bodies. Then, at last, the creation will see its true rulers, like it should have been in the garden, right? And it will know that the time has come to be rescued from corruption. This corruption that the earth has been subject to, Paul says. And to understand that, we need to back up a little bit and grasp the big picture story of creation. What's going on here, right? I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time here. But when we look at the world of creation right now, let's look at it right now. We look at it in the present, we see a world in the same condition that the children of Israel saw, right? It's the same world. It's the same world when they were enslaved by Egypt. Right? And just like God allowed the Israelites to go down into Egypt so that he could bring them out to define them, to show them who they were going to be forever. That forever they were going to be this freedom from slavery people. Like that's who they are. That's who they're defined as. In the same way, God allows the earth, the creation, to be subjected to summer and winter and growth and decay and birth and death. And Paul describes this physical world as being in bondage to decay. What does it mean that the physical world is in bondage to decay? You see, he's explaining something that's going on. He's explaining the current situation through the lens of Genesis, right? What happens in Genesis? The curse, right? The curse, because of humans, the ground was cursed and the world was subject to futility. So there's the Genesis curse thing going on here, and we are groaning, and the land is groaning. And so Paul he's personifying, right? He's making into a person the land here. He's showing, or he's making creation, or he's speaking about creation as a woman in the pains of childbirth. The groaning here is not just a sign of suffering, but it's a sign of expectant longing. When you're groaning, when you're having a child, it's not just pain in that moment. You know that something great is going to come after that. This is like our own new birth that Paul just got done talking about in Romans chapter 6. So that we too might walk in newness of life, verse 4. And then he goes on to talk about being born again. And so the fate of the earth is tied to the fate of humanity here. Have you ever been to the zoo, or better yet, have you ever been to like a circus and seen a bear or a monkey or something like that? Do they look especially happy? What was it? Was that a bear we saw, Jeanette? Remember at the state fair that one time that was just going in circles? We saw this little bear, and it was caged, maybe 10 by 10, and he was just doing circles, just running. He would run up the wall, do a flip, and come back. Run up the wall, do a flip, and come back. He was just going nuts in there. And sometimes I think that's kind of how creation is. Earthquakes and storms and all that energy, and it's not achieving anything. Only death and destruction come out of those things. And speaking of wild animals, what about the promise of the wolf and the lamb lying down together in Isaiah? Is that just a dream, or is that reality? Are those actually going to happen, or is that a metaphor? And Paul says, no, this is not a dream. It's a promise. All these things are a sign that the world is as it is. It's still God's good creation, yes. And it still is. Let's look at chapter 1. Romans chapter 1 real quick. In verse 20, he's talking about the guilt of the Gentiles and the world. And let's back into verse 18. For God's wrath is revealed from heaven against all godliness and unrighteousness of people who by their own unrighteousness suppress the truth. Since what can be known about God is evident among them because God has shown it to them. How has he showed it to them, Paul? Verse 20. For his invisible attributes, that is, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen in the creation of the world, being understood through what he has made. As a result, people are without excuse. The earth is still, it's like it's pregnant with power and glory. But right now, it's not the way it should be. And God's covenant faithfulness, that chesed, was always about his commitment that through his promises to Abraham, that one day he would make the whole world the way it was supposed to be. He would fill the whole world, and we would live the way we were supposed to be. And now, at long last, we can see what that means here in Romans chapter 8. Right? When humans rebelled, you got to remember Paul, he's constantly referring back to Genesis 1 through 3. When humans rebelled and worshiped parts of creation instead of God himself, right? That's what he's talking about in Romans chapter 1. Let me back up and read again through verse 23 this time. That was, I read through 20. Let me read 21 through 23 now. For though they knew God, people are without excuse. For though they knew God, they did not glorify him as God or show gratitude. Instead, their thinking became worthless, and their senseless hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man, birds, four-footed animals, and reptiles. Humans rebelled and worshipped parts of creation instead of the Creator himself. And when that happens, creation falls into disrepair, let's just call it that. And so God allows that state of slavery to continue, not because the creation itself wanted to be like that, if we're going to personify it, but because he was determined eventually to put the world back right. He was determined to put the world back to his original plan. So God had called for human beings. The plan had called for human beings to take their place under God, over the world, worshiping the Creator and using their glorious stewardship over the world. And so the creation isn't waiting to share the freedom of God's children. That's not what's going on here. It's waiting to benefit wonderfully when God's children are glorified and revealed. It's waiting. It's like when you're waiting, you're tiptoeing closer and closer to something with expectation for that freedom that it's going to enjoy when God gives to his children that glory, that wise rule and stewardship over all of creation, which is what was intended from the beginning, so that we could take the glorious image of God that we bear and spread it to the world. And that sort of perspective, when we can see that from the viewpoint, the whole created order, when we have that sort of viewpoint, the whole created order now has all sorts of implications. From the way we think about the ultimate future for the world, is the earth just going to be burnt up and never exist again? Or the end of the story, that's no longer this disembodied heaven, that we leave our physical bodies here and just our little spirit floats away somewhere else? Is that the story? That's not the story Paul's telling here. So our present anticipation for that final responsibility for God's world needs to change us now. That's what Paul is saying. That this is a positive, world-affirming view without any risk of turning the world into an idol. Right? Because that was the original sin. And so Paul moves right away here now in Romans chapter 8 to show our current position as God's children and how we need to be thinking about that future hope. We are longing for the time when we ourselves will be finally redeemed, when we will receive our those resurrection bodies that we were promised. We groan and we sigh as we experience the terrible things that happen in this world, the tension between the glorious promise that we have and the terrible reality of war and death that surrounds us in this world. That tension is sort of summed up by the fact that the Spirit is already working inside of us. Those of us who have been redeemed, we have the Spirit inside of us. But the job of the Spirit is not done, right? Paul is going to use that language of harvesting there a little bit later. And he's going to use it to show that we have the first fruits, right? The offering of the first fruits was literally the first fruits, the things that you gathered first, right as the harvest was going to begin. And Paul's using that harvesting image of offering this to God as the sign of the great crop that is going to come. And so we are left with this great hope for ourselves. We have the Spirit now. It's this tiny little blip, but we still have a whole harvest in front of us. We have this great hope, a hope that it's like faith. It's not seen, but we have a hope that is sure. We are groaning and waiting. We are eager but patient. That is supposed to be the Christian stance that defines us. We don't gloat, for example, we don't gloat when our opponent loses, right? Like a basketball game, or like when you win a championship next Tuesday. No gloating, right? We don't gloat when our opponent loses an election. We don't gloat when our opponent loses their life, right? We groan and we wait. And so Paul's larger picture here puts this groaning on the map of all of creation. We can see just how imperfect our human systems are. When we look out, we don't see life flourishing. We see death around us. We see birth pains. The whole creation in labor, Paul says, longing for this new world to be born. And the whole point of this lesson this morning is that we, as brothers and sisters, are called to share in that pain. Christianity is not some escapism where we go into a monastery and hide from the world. The church is not to be set apart from the pain of the world. It is to be in our prayers for exactly the place where the world is in pain. The church needs to be praying for the pain of the world. That's part of our calling. Our great role within God's purpose in new creation is supposed to be stewarding this wonderful creation. And so, redemption. Let's try and land this plane. I know we've been kind of in the clouds this morning, but the world around us matters, is the point. That God's creation matters, and it's looking forward to our redemption. That it knows, the creation knows that it can't be redeemed until the person causing all the problems is redeemed. Right? So if redemption is the release of debt or the release of slaves in scriptures, like in the year of Jubilee, In Romans chapter 8, the debt is death, and that slave master is corruption. And Jesus' resurrection is it's like the first rays of daylight of a new week. It's a sign to us here this morning that the process of God repossessing the entire creation, repossessing us from the power of sin and death, that process has begun now. And so you see, resurrection is not about leaving our bodies and going somewhere else. Resurrection is about our physical bodies being released from death. Just like Jesus' body that got up out of the grave. When our bodies are redeemed, the earth that we inhabit, that we live in, that earth is redeemed along with us. That's what Paul's saying here. And that resurrection of Jesus, that was an event that surprised even the earliest followers of Jesus, even the apostles that they would be called later. It surprised the earliest apostles and disciples. And it forced them to rethink everything that they thought they knew about Jesus. Do you remember? I keep repeating this over and over, but remember the road to Emmaus. These were disciples that were with Jesus just a few days earlier, or a week earlier. And what do they say? They don't recognize him. And they say, Luke chapter 24, but we were hoping that he was the one who was about to redeem Israel. The hope in their redemption was gone in their mind. And Jesus had to explain it to himself. To themselves, I should say. The resurrection of Jesus surprised even his closest followers. It caused them to rethink everything about this world. They believed that the risen Jesus, once they saw him and realized what had happened, they believed that the risen Jesus it started God's new creation, making it possible to become new and different kinds of humans. That's his whole argument in Romans chapter 6. That's what Paul's been saying all along. And now he says, take heart, be encouraged, because you now have the Spirit that helps us in our weakness. Because we don't know how we should pray, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us. Let's just read verse 26 through 27. In the same way, the Spirit also helps us in our weaknesses, because we do not know what to pray for as we should. Elizabeth, please stop. But the Spirit himself intercedes for us with unspoken groanings. And he who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because he intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. The presence of the Holy Spirit in believers, Paul says it is the first fruits. It's a down payment of that new redeemed creation. So, knowing all of that, let's skip down to the end of chapter 8. Verse 35. Who can separate us from the love of Christ? Can affliction or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? As it is written, he's quoting here from Psalm 44, because of you we are being put to death all day long. We are counted as sheep to be slaughtered. No. In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things that come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything that was created will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. That is the great hope that we have in the redemption, that we can't be separated from these things because we have Jesus, the Messiah, the Christ. And the question is this morning then, will you make the decision to join that community of Jesus followers? Will you become like him? Will you put on Christ? Will you be born again? Will you become a member of that community that has put their believing loyalty, their faith and their trust into Messiah Jesus, to Christ Jesus? Because you need to. Do it now. Do it now. Come forward now. Do it now. As we stand and as we sing this song here. We'll see you all next week for those who are following online. I can find the button to turn it off. There we go.